Welcome to part 2 of My Life with Judy Murray. We're honored to have Judy with us, longtime member of the American Legion here in town, currently a resident of Pontiac, but you lived over 60 years here in Oxford during your younger days, and have some very interesting stories to tell. In our last episode, we kind of left off when you were getting into high school, and I know that we had talked a little bit about the setting of things in Oxford back in those days, and I think you'd like to tell us a little more about that.
Well, when I was older, different things happened in the park, and when we would come up onto the main drag, there used to be a family that lived right on the corner, and they had a daughter and a handicapped son, and they lived there for quite a few years. And then when she got out of school, they moved, so they tore the house down and put a Kroger store in. And that was next to the park. And next to that was a restaurant. And the next building next to that was Waltman's Bakery. And a friend of mine that I went to high school with was working there. And she does not like me to tell that story, but anyway.
We won't tell anybody.
Okay, we won't tell anybody. And so she was working, and I used to go up and visit her and everything, and she said, "Judy, let's join the Navy." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, that way I'll be closer to Bill," her boyfriend.
He was in the Navy?
He was in the Navy. So I said, "Well, okay." So then I went back home and told my mother.
And how old were you at this point?
I was 18. And I told my mother, and she said, "Okay, let's go." So we had to come into Pontiac, and we went to the recruiting station, and we talked about the Army and the Navy. And
what year would this have been?
Probably 1971.
No, it'd be more like 51, wouldn't it? What year did you graduate from high school?
51.
Okay, there we go.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Got my years mixed up. So anyway, my mother and I went to Pontiac and found out all the information and everything, and I came back and I went back uptown and talked to her and told her, and she said, "Oh, okay." So she went home and told her mother that she was going to join the Navy with me. And she says, "My mother got so mad to think that Judy was trying to talk you into going in the Navy. I'm going to call her mother and tell her what I think about that." So she called my mother and told her that I was trying to get Doreen to go in the Navy. And my mother said, "Now just a minute." She and I went to Pontiac to find out for Doreen because she wanted to be close to her boyfriend Bill. So, and they had been friends for years, so they finally got over the upset of that. But anyway, Bill came home and she got married. So
she never went in?
She never went in. So I went in the Army instead.
Was the thought of the Korean War and what was happening during that time troubling to you or your family?
Well, knowing that my brother had been in the military, and when I had told him that what I was going to do, he said, "Well, you better think about it. You know, it's going to be a different kind of life than you're used to, and then you'll just have to wait and see where you go after you finish your basic training."
But at the time, what kind of options were available to you? I mean, could you have gone to college if you had wanted to, or, was there any?
They started that later on, but they did go back to the 50s. From 50s on, that you could go to school and learn.
Yeah, but when you actually graduated from high school, you didn't have that option,
No.
did you? And what did your parents, were they encouraging you to go one direction or another?
No, I don't think so. My dad was working and my mother was home, and when I told her, she said, "Well, you're not going to go to college or whatever. I think that would be good because whatever you pick, or they help you pick something, you'll learn something."
Mm-hmm.
So when I went in, I was a medic because when I got out of high school, my mother was working at the state hospital.
What'd she do there?
She was a nurse's aide there, and then she got her practical nurse's degree, and so she was still there.
So this was in Pontiac, right?
Yes. And she...
Was that what event later was called Clinton Valley? Was that the same thing?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right. So my mother took me to Lansing to take the test to be able to work there because it was part of the state. And I got my license and was able to come back and go to work at the state hospital. And I was very lucky. Being there, turned out to be my sister-in-law. She was the second highest nurse at the state hospital at the time. And my brother worked there, and they had met and then got married.
Yeah. Let's go back and talk more about the service, though. Okay?
Okay.
Let me just make sure that I've got this right in my mind. You were in the service before you worked at the state hospital. Is that true or not?
No, I worked at the state hospital and then went in there.
Then you went in. So you didn't really go into the service right after high school, did you?
No.
This little episode with your friend kind of waylaid your plan there.
Well, she was the one that got me into the military. And, well, she didn't make me, but I went anyway. And I was in for 3 years.
How long did you work at the hospital before you went in?
Probably, it was in the summer, 6 months.
So not a real long time.
Not a real long time, but I worked in the receiving where they brought people that were going to be staying there. And my sister-in-law was did different tests on them, and shock treatments and all this sort of stuff. And so she always made sure I got in to help in there so that I would see what was going on and know how different things happened. And
this caught your interest, didn't it?
yeah. And so when I went in the military, I did the medical. And
so where was the first place they sent you when you went into the? It was the Army, right?
Yes, Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
And you went through basic training?
Went basic training there, and then after that, then I was sent to Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
And that was for?
That was for my military service as a medic. And
you got your medic training there,
yes.
Did you?
I got my medical training when I was in basic. After basic training, they sent you to school, and you learned whatever it was that you would put your name in for that you wanted to do. And then we went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and I landed up.
We're gonna pause at Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
For just a moment, and we'll be right back. Back with Judy Murray on My Life. Fort Devens, Massachusetts is where we left off. What were you doing in Fort Devens, Massachusetts?
Well, I went to work, landed up working for the chief nurse of the hospital, and there were 5 men that were in this office that I went to work with together, and we supervised military and civilian personnel about them working on the wards and doing the scheduling for them, their days off, which ward they were going to be on, which whatever. And so I did that for 2 years. And by that time I had met my husband-to-be, and he had just came back from Japan with Colonel Turner, who was ear, nose, and throat specialist. And so he had the
so he was medical too?
Yes. He was worked in the operating room, and the colonel, we had ear, nose, and throat office, and they even got their eyes examined. We had an ophthalmologist, and 2 optometrists in there. So we were pretty full of big medical training. So I went to work there because my future husband says they need somebody at the eye clinic. And I said, well, I don't think the major's going to be very happy me leaving working with these guys and everything. And he said, I'll talk to Colonel Turner and we'll see what happens. And so he told Colonel Turner, and he said, Monday morning, report to my building, the office. And I said, she's not going to be happy. And he said, well, she's a major and I'm a colonel, so I guess I do better than her then. So I went to work in an eye clinic for the next year and helped when guys came in with broken glasses, so I used to fix them for them. And we had the Army, we took care of Army, Navy, and Air Force because we were a big hospital in that area. So we had a lot of people going. And I got married.
Kind of a different life in the military when you're in that profession than if you were out doing something else, isn't it?
Well, it was different than going to college. But we lived the hospital was about 3 or 4 miles back in the woods and stuff. So the men lived on one side of the hospital and the women lived on the other side. So all you had to do was just walk across the street and go there. So, and we had a building that we fixed up for entertainment for evenings and weekends. And so we had a pretty good time.
Better than fighting in the jungle, right?
Yeah, it was. And we had this captain that was from New York, and he happened to mention that he goes to New York every weekend. And we said, well, you wouldn't happen to give us a ride into New York, would you? And he said, okay. So there was 5 of us girls went in with him, and he took us to New York. And there was a hotel called Hotel Piccadilly. And that's where we stayed when we went to New York.
So this would have been early 50s, somewhere, 52 maybe? Somewhere in there.
Yeah. And so we stayed at this hotel, and we had our uniforms on, so we got military discounts for being in the service. And we'd change clothes and we'd come out, and we would go down the street a little ways, and Jack Dempsey, the boxer, had a restaurant there that he stood just inside the door, and anybody that came in, he said, how do you do? So every time we got there, we went over to say hello to Jack Dempsey, and he said, oh my God, here comes my girls, set them up, here they come.
They got to know you.
He got to know us, yeah. In fact, I happen to think I had not thought about it at the time, but I have a picture of him and I and Jack Dempsey together that we took.
Well, maybe we can still come up with that. Yeah.
Anyway, so we used to go back and forth from our base to New York and see what Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty and different other sites that they had that we were able to go to. So
for a small town Oxford girl, you got to have some pretty good experiences in the big city, didn't you?
Yes, I found out that being in Oxford in a little town, that when you get out into the world, there's a lot of stuff going on that you didn't really know what did, but I guess that just gave us learn to take care of ourselves a little.
Outside of the Jack Dempsey story, what else was what was the other best time that you had in New York City?
Into the Statue of Liberty.
Ah.
And we got to go all the way up to the top and out on the thing because it was always open that way. It's not open there. I don't know how far up now you can go, that they've closed it all off. And then we went to the Empire State Building, and that was really something to go up that high and come out on the roof and look around and see all the buildings and that sort of thing. It was being a very educational town to be able to find out what different places were and where they were at and that sort.
What about living in Massachusetts? That had to be a unique experience too.
Yeah, the girl that my name was Reed when I went in the military, and her name was Panette, and her bed was right next door to mine, and she'd say, well, I'll take you home with me on the weekend, and have you ever ate lobster before? And I said, no, not from a little town in Oxford. But anyway, went home, and her mother always fixed lobster for us when I came home, so I could have it, and then go different places around in the towns and everything to see how what was going on there. And our base at Fort Devens was Army Security Agency built, where they took being very quiet about what goes on in there. So, but so I stayed there at Fort Devens for 3 years, and like I say, I met my husband there, and we got married. And my mother and dad said, well, why don't you come home and get married? And I said, no, we wanted to stay here and get married. So they said, well, okay.
Where was your husband from?
New York.
Oh.
So I had a very going on looking for my wedding dress. And I went into Air, was the first town that was right there. And they didn't have anything like that. And one of our friends that we always sat and ate together and everything, the man, he worked in the vet department. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I've got a motorcycle and I'll give you a ride to Boston so you could see what kind of dresses you could find. So I said, okay. So I got on the back end of his motorcycle and we went to Boston.
Okay, we're going to pause right there because we need to take a break, but we're going to find out the rest of the story about the wedding dress in just a minute. Back with Judy Murray. You were telling us about your experience in going to Boston on a motorcycle to get your wedding dress.
Yes. We went to Boston and we went 2 or 3 shops, and he would sit there and I'd go in and try one on and I'd come out and say, well, what do you think? And the one lady says, he's not supposed to see you in your wedding dress. And I said, I'm not marrying him. I said, he just gave me a ride. She didn't think that was very nice of me, but anyway. So I got my wedding dress, and the adjutant of the hospital gave me away.
So you did get married in Massachusetts?
So I got married in Massachusetts, and we had the wedding, and then we come back, and we had the reception in the mess hall. And the mess hall supplied the food, which I don't think they should have, but anyway, the cooks and everybody, they were friends of ours, so they cooked up food for everybody there, and then we came home to Oxford to see my mother and dad and introduce my husband to my mother and dad.
Were you still in the service at that point?
Yes. What they were doing at that base was that anybody that got married, military together, they always sent the men one way and sent the women the other. Now I don't know why they were that bad about the things, but anyway, they did. So that's why we got married when we did. I got married May the 5th, and so went home, came to Oxford, and he had met my mother and dad, and saw some of the people that I went to school with. They had a big party at a house and had invited us so that we could, I could introduce him to my husband. And so we took 10 days. So after that, why it was time to go back to base and get discharged from the military. And then from there, I worked in a little factory just outside the town. They made suspenders.
Was this in Massachusetts?
Yes. And so I worked in the suspender factory, and my husband was put on orders. So, and I was pregnant at the time. So they said that they were going to send us to Washington at the hospital there.
Washington, D.C.?
Yeah. And so we went, and when we got there, they said, well, we don't need anybody here. I don't know why you're here, whatever it was that happened. But anyway, they told him to pick wherever he wanted to go, and they would put him. So
he wasn't out of the service yet, but
no,
were you?
He did a 20-year. When we came back from my getting married, then I got out of the military. So then I was a civilian. And so we went to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And that's where both of my children were born. And when my daughter was born, they put my husband overseas. And so I came home to live with my mother and dad until my daughter was 6 months old. And then I could go over with my 2 children.
Did you?
Yes.
Where did you go overseas?
In Paris, about 50 miles out at a base. And my husband had found, was an apartment house, and we lived there. And
so how long were you overseas altogether?
3 years.
Okay. Was that a good experience?
Yes. We found that the French people were not very happy with us. They were not kind to the military. And I know at different times when I used to drive up to the base, it always seemed so strange because there was a machine gun in base. The canals went through, we had to go over this bridge, and alongside the bridge was a machine gun, and the military, the French were there. And so it was sort of scary at thinking you're out here and you think you're protected, and here's machine gun emplacement to see maybe somebody's going to get killed or whatever. So we didn't get out too often, but we did. There was a town called Shirley, and we could walk from our apartment there and we go to the pastry shop, and they had outside mostly. I was so surprised they had outside meat instead of butcher shop. It was outside and not in a building and not behind, being very clean and all that sort of stuff. And if you said you wanted maybe something from there, and they said okay, and they'd pick it up with their hands and put it up on the scales, and I thought, oh, lordy, and then they'd just wrap it up in a piece of paper and say, here. And
what other countries did you live in besides France?
That was the only one we lived in, but we were able to go to the World's Fair in Brussels, Belgium.
Yes.
My husband and I went there, and the lady that lived upstairs, she said she would take care of my 2 children while he and I went. So we were able to go to the World's Fair and see different buildings from different countries and what was going on in each one of them, and that sort of thing. And it was really people were very friendly, very open.
Did you ever get a chance to go back?
No.
No.
No, I came back to Oxford and went to work.
Okay,
Yeah.
so do you remember approximately what year you came back to Oxford?
1959.
1959.
Yes.
Okay, so there was no war going on then except for the Cold War, but the Korean War was done. And you came back to Oxford from
Yes.
Europe, is that right?
Yes.
And your husband came back as well? Because he was
No,
still
he was still there.
He stayed there?
He stayed there, yes.
Okay, so this was a voluntary decision on
yeah.
your part.
Yes.
So tell me, what did you do then when you got to Oxford?
Find a job. I was able to find my sister-in-law's mother worked at the unemployment office, and she had said that there was an optical place in Pontiac that was looking for someone. So I went in and I got the job as a receptionist and do repairs on glasses and that sort of thing, fitting them and helping them fill out forms and
So
all
did your
this
mom
stuff.
and dad help out watching the kids?
No, I stayed there about a couple of weeks, and we found an apartment. And so I used to take the children to a lady to babysit, and then I drove it to Pontiac and worked, and then I had to go back home, pick the kids up. So it was quite a long day from going from one place to another with,
I could imagine. We've got to wrap it up pretty soon, but I don't want to cut you off here. How many years were you working as an optometrist assistant?
27 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
You got to know a lot of people pretty well during that time, didn't you?
Yeah, I used to be able to, some of the people came in, knew who they were, what their address was, or what their telephone number. They were always quite surprised that I remembered that. But I just wanted to say that Oxford has grown quite a bit since I first came to Oxford when I was a little girl, and my friend worked at the bakery, and next door to it was an implement company, that farm equipment, and it was a big opening beside their building, and they had plows and all kinds of different equipment and everything. And next door was Harrow Cleaners, and upstairs over Harrow Cleaners was a telephone office. And a friend of my mother and dad, she was a telephone operator. So in the summertime, when I couldn't think of anything else to do, I used to go up and sit with her. She let me sit up on the real high stools, and you pulled this out and you plugged it in.
Did you get to talk to all your friends?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's, just to sum up, you did remarry.
Yes.
And your then husband passed away.
Yes.
His name was?
Robert Murray.
Robert Murray.
Yep.
You have 2 children. Are they both still?
They're not living at this time, no.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My brother was 83 when he passed away.
No, your children.
Oh, my children? I have a son and a daughter. My daughter lives in West Bloomfield, and my son is in Colorado Springs.
Well, that's a good place to visit.
Yes, it was
Okay.
very beautiful. I've been there a couple of times,
Yeah.
and to see the mountains filled with snow and all that sort of stuff. And so,
Well, we want to thank you for being with us. It's been a pleasure talking to you and reviewing your life with you.
they're quite welcome.
If you had to change anything, would you do it differently?
No, I think the experience that I had going into the military was fulfilling and make me a broader thought person about different things and places and this sort of thing. So that was a good education for me.
Well, thanks for your service, and thanks for what you're doing for the American Legion and the Ladies Auxiliary right now. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks you for watching, and we'll see you next time.